I am starting our new chapter. We finished chapter 8. Chapter 9 is development. So how do countries progress? How this is answering the questions of how does what are rich countries, what are poor countries, how do they go, how do countries develop, how did the US get here, how did Europe get there, just all sorts of stuff on development. And so this is going to be part 1. So I'm going to go through day 3 of this. So you can do this with your assignments and all that jazz. So day 1, answer this question, just as other than age and physical development, what makes an adult different from a teenager? And so that's a good analogy. And I might be using this one a lot with countries, because you can think of countries as people. They have their own thoughts, they have their own ways of doing things. Everyone is different, and we all develop at different rates. And so we're gonna kind of look at different stuff. So your totally useless bit of information for today is that Norway knighted a penguin, and so here he is, right here, good old Nils Olav. So, Sir, sorry. So there's that. And so let's get into the development. So we got to introduce it. So we got to introduce some terms and just get you starting. And so development is just improving the lives of the people in the country. And so you have the knowledge and the technology, and this is coming together. So you can know a lot of stuff and not have technology to back it, or you can be very technological and not know how to use the tech, and that affects your development. And so you'll have kind of this development of this developed countries like the United States, and then also more developed countries. And I would say more developed would be like Mexico, and parts of Eastern Europe like Estonia, and then parts of Asia as well. And then you have the developing and the less developing, and those would be kind of like Central American countries, some South American, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then some Southeast Asian countries. And those are the less developed or developing countries. And so I gave you some examples for this, but what are some more developed countries and less developed countries? And what are the differences? What makes a more developed country not a less developed country? So maybe make kind of a couple points about that. And so here is the index of human index. So human index, I'm trying to see where I can put myself without blocking. This is just who is more developed. So 1 is perfect, and then 0 is bad, super bad. And so you can see in here, you can see here that, come on, that you can see America, Canada, Western Europe, South Korea, Japan, and Australia, New Zealand are all above this 0.88. Obviously, we don't have anyone that's perfect, because it's impossible to be perfect with development, because we're always expanding. And then you have these kind of middle countries. So you have China, Russia, North Africa, Mexico, South America, that are kind of developed. And then you can see the lighter places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, all of these countries right here. And then also Sub-Saharan Africa growing. And then also parts of Oceania. Those are all kind of growing, and they're developing. And so wealth doesn't always mean you're developed. and being developed isn't always positive. So you can develop. China is developing right now, but they're also developing via human rights violation by using essentially slave labor in some stuff and allowing sweatshops to happen and all that. So you can develop and it's not good. And then it also depends on what is produced, what countries produce things, and also where it's produced. Because if you look at your smartphone, it's probably not made here in America. It's probably made in China or somewhere along those lines. It's cheaper to make something in China so you make more money. Apple does that, Samsung, everyone does that. So it really is what's being developed or produced and and where it's being produced. And so I gave you an example, but what are ways development might be negative? I gave you sweatshop workers, but what else can be a negative? So try not to use the sweatshop unless you can add to what I discussed. And so measuring wealth, how do we see what country is doing good, what country is doing bad? And the gross national product and the gross domestic product are our best ways. So the GNP and the GDP. And so this is kind of a metric that we use. So like what's the size of our GDP? What's the size of our GNP? And it varies. So we'll have that. And then you also have gross national income. So how much is everyone making? And then there's per capita GNI or gross national income. And that's what does each person make. And so if you look, this is a GNI. And so let me switch colors to red. So America is up there, Germany, the UK, the what's it called? Scandinavia, Australia, up there, and then this area right here. And so, as of I think our last time I checked, the highest the GNI, gross national income, is in actually the island, or not the island, the country of Qatar, because there's not a lot of people there, and the people who have the wealth have a lot of it because it's an oil producing country. Also, you have the United Emirates right here. This is where Dubai is. So if you see like the all the fancy skyscrapers and like the island resort type thing that they have out there, that's in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. So you have that going on as well, and so that these are developed countries or at least high income, and that's usually because only a few people have it, but they're really rich and not a lot of people live there. And so there's formal and informal economy, and you can also say I like to use this, the shadow economy. Oh yeah. And so the shadow economy, it just sounds like evil or something, but it's not really. So the informal or shadow economy is just it's illegal per se in the eyes of the government, but you're not it's anything that you do untaxed. So mowing yards is like that, is kind of informal because I like when I was growing up as a little kid, mowing yards, I didn't pay taxes on the lawns. I just mowed my neighbor's yards, and I got like $60 for it. And so, is that illegal? Yeah, but it's like someone's paying for a service, or if you have a housekeeper that you pay in cash, that's informal. Or if you pay something at a farmer's market, that is not really taxed or anything like that. And then there's the formal economy that's buying landscaping service, a official keep like maid service, or eating out or buying stuff at Walmart. And so the informal economy is more in the less developed countries. And that's mostly because they don't trust the formal to do the right thing. And so, what activities would you count as informal besides what I said? And then what countries do you think have informal economies and why? And why do you think they like? I'll give you an example. I think it was Venezuela had a huge and still does have a huge informal economy. And why? So think about like choose kind of a less developed country and then look at the informal or the shadow economy. And then there's this world systems theory, and this is all from Emmanuel Wallerstein. And so he said where we are at today is all because of imperialism, kind of like what we did in the last episode. Imperialism kind of put these countries, these less developed countries, down a peg because they were only there to develop these empire states like Great Britain, America, Russia, Portugal, all of these places. And he divides it into core, semi periphery, and periphery. And we talked about this in the earlier part of the year. And so this is coming back. And so this is looking at international relations, history, and sociology, and looking at. And so you have core, which is a developed United States being a core, and then a periphery, an underdeveloped, like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And then you have semi-periphery, which is like it's developing, it's almost to core, but it's getting there. Mexico is one of them. Brazil is growing, but I think it might have been bumped up to core, but we'll see. Um, and so make sure you draw this because this is important, or at least jot it down. So let's use green. So the core countries, so the rich countries, take cell phones. Cell phones. We go to periphery and semi-periphery countries to develop cell phones. The core country made the idea and then made the schematics, did all of this, and then said to the semi and the periphery countries, hey, give us your raw materials, give this, and we'll give you this product. And so that's why we can get iPhones for kind of cheaper than if we try to make it here in America because we have um, more labor laws on the books. And so we kind of exploit the underdevelopedness of these countries to get what we want. Like if you look at your shoes, they're not made in America probably. Like if you do, they're pretty expensive. And so, like for instance, my sandals that I'm wearing now, $15. Nike, made in a sweatshop probably. And then I have some nice school shoes that I wore sometimes, and they're from SAS, which is San Antonio Shoemakers. And so these $15, they're comfortable. I like them. I wear them a lot. My wife hates them, but those SAS shoes cost like almost $300 because it's like handmade leather in Texas. It's like it's kind of like for arch support and like for you to stand it around and just they're comfortable shoes. And then also they're made here in Texas. They're made in America. So obviously it costs a little more to develop things in America. And so here are some examples. So you see these are kind of the core countries and Japan. And then you have periphery, semi periphery, and Russia. I think Russia should be semi periphery because they have a lot of like they're a growing country still. I don't say that they're core, but they are developing still, and they did have an empire kind of, and they had the Soviet Union, all that, and I think they're no longer a periphery but a semi periphery. So this, in my opinion, I pulled this picture and I don't fully agree with it. And also, if you look, small little guy right here, Israel is a core country, and it's mostly because the United States props it up make sure that it has a functioning democracy in the Middle East. And so define development and describe the differences between like more developed countries like adults and a less developed country like a teenager or a kid, and try use real examples. So day two, we're gonna try to we're like I had this up, and we were supposed to do this more at the beginning of the year, and then I just kind of switched around what I wanted to do. So obviously, don't do this bell work though. And so paths to development. And so we're gonna try to look at how some real examples of trying to bring people to a developed world. But your totally useless bit of information is Swedish's word for Friday cozy time is fredagsmi. Probably. I probably messed that up. And if any of my friends who live in Sweden um, hear that, I'm sorry. Forgive me, please. So, but paths to development. And how do you get to development? And so the UN came up with, at the turn of the century, to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, universal primary education, promote gender equality, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV and AIDS, and to ensure environmental sustainability. These were the 7 kind of major goals. And the thing is, the UN proposed it, but the UN really didn't push anything like this is how you do it. And when they did, it was kind of like it didn't work as well as companies, the free market, really hammering this stuff out. And so 16 years later, how do you think we did? Or like, I think 20 years later now, how do you think we did? And so the UN did create the Human Development Index to try to gauge, are we succeeding? Is this working? And so it looks at decent standard of living, long and healthy life, access to knowledge. And so it shows here like 1 being the best, 0 being the worst, and it shows kind of who's developing more. And this is starting to look a little bit more like other countries, or like the other maps that I showed. So in 2014, we were able to see this. And so obviously the same kind of people of Western Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, Japan, you can kind of see a little bit Israel, New Zealand, um, Argentina. All of these places are developing at a very high rate, and they're already have a good standard of living. And then you have an adjusted HDI, which puts in inequality. And so it's like, is a place fair or not? And so in 2012, when they kind of came this out, this is how everyone ranked. And so if you look back, human development, Russia, pretty good. It's in that 0.8 scale. Let's move over. It's completely white. It's less than 32. If you look at Iran and Saudi Arabia, also down. They're kind of up there as well. And then it's unfair. If you look at China, obviously, China, I think, probably should be lower. And then even Japan's the second or third largest economy in the world. It has a huge inequality. And then also showing the Human Development Index from 14 or from 11. And so what are these inequalities, and why does it matter that there is inequality in these countries? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Answer those questions on your assignment. And then we're talking about the types of jobs. So these jobs are important for development. So, for instance, early on in America, when we were colonies, not even country, like we weren't even a country yet, colonies, we were primarily agriculture, fishing, very small stuff. Like we had a lot of we had a lot of primary sector jobs and very few secondary. We weren't really producing a whole lot. That was Britain. Britain was here. And then because of the Industrial Revolution that happens afterwards, tertiary jobs happen. And so primary jobs, these are like kind of menial jobs, kind of we would think of them as old-timey. Manufacturing jobs, important and they're needed. And then you have tertiary sector jobs, which most people in America go into a tertiary sector job. I'm in a tertiary sector job in education because I'm producing a service for payment. Like I get paid to make this video. And it's like YouTube doesn't pay me, but the school pays me to teach y'all. And then retail, like working at McDonald's, is a service like you are producing food for money. And so that's education, government, lawyers, banking, like the medical field is a service industry. And so we're mostly in today this with some of this, and then we have a lot of farming, which we're kind of an exception as a core country that we have a whole lot of primary agriculture jobs and fishing jobs. So, but then workers' productivity and the access to raw materials and available of consumer goods. So these are important as well. And then also the standard of living. So, for instance, our infrastructure is pretty good. It's working well and all that good stuff, but it hasn't really been updated for a while. Like if you've ever been on I-35, it's still under construction. It's still needing repairs. It's still being updated. And so all that, and it's like you can see Texas highways, a lot of it is having a lot of construction. So this is needed to operate our society. Like obviously our schools infrastructure is growing. We are building our gym, pool area, and as of right now, we don't have a lot of parking spaces for the 10th and 11th graders driving to school. And so, and for the faculty who drive here, and then also the bus driver and anyone who works in the central office across the way. It's like, but after we develop that, we'll have more parking for everyone. And so that's the ultimate goal. But see, our infrastructure at our school is improving. Also, like Gus Thomason and Oates, still under construction. I've worked at the school for 3 years now, still under construction. It's gotten better, but it's still under construction. And so, why is infrastructure important for developing countries? If you need any more on infrastructure, there's a video that you can look up in the PowerPoint. So you can look at that. But paths to development, there's a couple ways to do it. How do you develop? Some are self-sufficient. So we're encouraging people to develop new stuff with not a whole lot of international trade. And we're going to try to protect ourselves from, the foreign markets. And so, and our investment. So when the government or private entities invest, it kind of goes across equally. They're not choosing winners and losers. And the challenges are you have to protect. Have to protect from bad businesses. But how do you do that when you're trying to do that equally? And also, you need a huge bureaucracy. You need a whole lot of paperwork and a whole lot of systems to make that happen. And so there's this video from the World Bank about how people are creating jobs in the Arab world. And then number two, international trade. So you open up to international investors. And so hopefully you get a more developed country coming into your country to help. like to help spur on trade, to help invest. That's why people are like, hey, give me that McDonald's, or hey, give me that Walmart, or something like that. Like, hey, I want this to go on. And so this gets you into the international market, and this actually helps you develop faster. It's kind of like making the wheel. The first person who made the wheel struggled because it's like, okay, like how do I make this work? Does it need to be a square, an octagon, or does it need to be a circle? And so later on, the guy's like, hey, I now that I can see the wheel, that guy's using a wheel. I can make that better. And then the next day, I can make that better because they're learning from one another. And that's what international trade hopefully does. And then the challenges are like if your international market goes away, you don't have the stuff in place to help self develop. And then there's also uneven resource distribution. And then you're also dependent on like the United States or Japan or someone like that to invest in your country. And then there's the international approach of winning. And so some countries were developed like this, and then this was using developing countries who have a lot of raw like materials, and it's just kind of like mixing and matching your economies together, because if you do something really well and I do something really well, why not we work together and you keep on doing that and I'll keep on doing this, and together we'll develop, and we give the world kind of the iPhone or like the Samsung or this. And so you can look at Turkey's growth. This is a little bit of a dated video, so part of it has gone awry, but then there's a man named Rosto, and he has stages of development. And so there's the traditional society, which you'll see mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not really started in development. You're not really thinking forward. You're just trying to get by, and that's pretty much like farming, fishing, all those primary jobs. And then you have stage two, this precondition for takeoff. So how can we develop more? And that's new businesses come in, governments say, hey, we're gonna make it a effort to get better technology, to have infrastructure, to make it more like business friendly for people to come in and invest. Then there's the takeoff. So after all that happens, the economy booms. It grows, and then it drives to maturity. And so this is you taking the modern technology, you're adding more growth, and you're adding more skilled workers in to make that nice. And then you're in the age of mass consumption. This is what America is in. And this is where you're no longer making stuff, you're no longer making a whole lot of stuff, and you're just consuming. We're a consuming culture. We consume everything, and it's part of our country. And so over time, it goes from the traditional society, which was kind of like the colonies, and then preconditions. We kind of win our independence, and we have all this. And then in the early 1800s, we have the takeoff, and then in the 1940s, during World War II, we have this drive to maturity, and then when we get back in the 1980s, I would say, is when we get into high mass consumption, where we are just consuming everything. And so that's kind of my thing, where like over time, it took us over 200 years to get there, but we're here. And so then sometimes you can throw the money at the problem of development. So there are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which helps loan out stuff to governments who need to help develop or stabilize their economy if they're going through like a depression or a recession. And so um, think about what these challenges could be. And Most projects fail because of faulty engineering, the use of funds, or it even being stolen. The new infrastructure doesn't attract foreign investors, and then this ultimately ends up all the countries, even the United States, are in total amounts of debt. Like the whole world is in debt, and so this turns into the dependency theory. And so if we're all dependent on each other, um, this is what causes some countries to exploit others because you're so dependent on this country to support you. Like the United States, like let's say, for instance, we were supporting, let's throw out a country, Gabon. We were supporting Gabon in this, and then eventually what happens is like America's like, we don't want to do this anymore. Bye. What do you think happens after the United States pulls out all of the money and all the resources? Do you think they're going to be able to do this? Maybe, but it's going to struggle and it's going to suck. But then there's also fair trade, where this is the international community putting pressure on businesses to have a standard of working to protect workers, so it's not slave labor, it's not it's not sweatshop labor, it's not stuff like that. And we're trying to create fair trade. And you'll see this usually in coffee shops. It's like, oh, we're fair trade coffee, or we're fair trade this, fair trade that. And you'll, if you see that, that means all the workers that were involved in the making of this product had met this standard, this fair trade standard of quality of life for its people working on the product that you were buying. And then we talked about this last time. It's the Brandt curve, Willy Brandt, and I'm not going to touch more. Um, it's the rich North and um, moving the goalpost for what's it call it, Australia and New Zealand, and then everything else is poor. And so that's kind of Willy Brandt's thought. He developed this in 1980. And so make sure you answer the summary. John Oliver. I'm saying, yeah, and then we're going to stop here. So we're going to stop here at day 3. So hopefully this is a good warm up for you. I'm kind of getting us into this development. You can see this in video games. There's video games about development like Civilization, Sim City. All this is like developing of the world. And like you kind of get control. So if you want to play a game like that during this kind of quarantine time, you can do that. Just download it or something like that. So hopefully this helps you out with taking your notes. But if you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Have a good one, guys.